Well, Parliament's Ethics Committee is due to establish a subcommittee to review members of Parliament's Code of Ethics after former Health Minister Zweli Mkhize was cleared recently of any ethical wrongdoing in the Digital Vibes debacle. That report was originally carried by the Sunday Times, by the way. After decision, the Special Tribunal ruled that the SIU may seek to recover nearly 5 million rand from Mkhize's daughter-in-law and from entities owned by his wife and his son Dedani. Let's talk about everything that's unfolded in recent days. We're joined by Pieter-Louis Myburgh, an investigative journalist and author. And Peter, it was your work that set off much of what then led to the end of Zweli Mkhize's time as health minister. Let's go back for a moment and talk about the payments that were ultimately looked into by the Ethics Committee.
Good afternoon to your viewers. Yeah, look, so there are, of course, these very complicated payment structures that seems to have basically had the result in monies from the Digital Vibes contract having been filtered to an array of family members and business associates of Dr. Mkhize and also to Dr. Mkhize himself. So I think ultimately, you've mentioned the Parliament Standing Committee and their findings on his ethical responsibility on this, but it's quite a curious decision if you keep in mind that, some of the monies did not only end up with his family members, but also indirectly or directly really to the benefit of the former health minister. There was that relatively small payment that went towards some house renovations on a property that Minister Mkhize owned in Johannesburg. So it does seem that the Ethics Committee took a very curious line and approach when it came to its investigation into the minister's involvement.
But also, is it possible then, Peter, that the ethics investigation may reach the conclusion which it has by Parliament, but also the SIU then can reach or convince a court to reach a different conclusion on guilt?
Yeah, look, so the two outcomes currently that's almost, very strangely enough playing out at the same time are almost diametrically opposed to one another. It was a almost laughable outcome this week where Parliament's Ethics Committee released its findings, or it surfaced on the Tuesday, I think, and then literally the next day on the Wednesday, the SIU did clinch quite a significant victory at the Special Tribunal following its approach at the Special Tribunal to attach or to add these Mkhize individuals to their court case. So remember, there was a son, Dedani, and then also Minister Mkhize, or former Minister Mkhize's daughter-in-law, Zweli Mkhize. The SIU requested that they be added to that court case to enable them to, at the Special Tribunal, to then recoup some of the monies that they allege was unlawfully and corruptly filtered to the Mkhize family as a alleged kickback following from the Digital Vibes contract. So that is a victory for the SIU, and it's really curious that these two sort of platforms, or these two arenas in which this matter is now being contested, can reach these diametrically opposed or contrasting conclusions, because it does seem, if you look at the SIU's work on the matter, I've gone into really they've gone into a lot of detail in forensically tracing the flows, and they seem to be delivering a very clear-cut case that seems to, that does make a strong case for the monies having corruptly flowed to the Mkhize family. How the Parliament Ethics Committee could have come to a different conclusion, considering the forensic facts on the table, I think the South African public is quite right to be somewhat perplexed as to how that happened.
And following then what the SIU has been working on as far as the investigation into Digital Vibes, have you seen anything which the SIU has unearthed that you were not aware of when you published those first articles that ultimately set off the process?
Yeah, look, certainly. So I think it's always a wonderful sort of process. As investigative journalists, we of course are quite limited in terms of what we can and can't work on. So typically, a set of information might be made available to us, so we retrieve information from sources or individuals familiar with a development like the Digital Vibes contract, and then the Special Investigating Unit with much wider reaching powers and scope, legal scope, they can of course then step in and subpoena bank statements, emails, telephone records, etc. And there certainly was, and they have to be lauded in their diligence on this project. I've certainly managed to not only identify some of the payments that I was able to follow, but the SIU certainly also, took it a step further and managed to trace some of the payments all the way to these Mkhize accounts that I, at that juncture, had not been kind of privy to. So certainly it does speak to a very thorough and diligent investigation.
And what more are you hearing, if anything at all, about just how much closer the SIU is to finalizing its case?
Yeah, look, I think that's going to be wrapped up pretty soon. So they essentially are going to ask the Special Tribunal, now that these individuals are mentioned can be added to the case, the Mkhize family members, they are now going to ask the Special Tribunal to cancel and set aside the contract on the basis that it was awarded on an unlawful manner. And then, of course, the important aspect or leg of their work is to then recoup the 150 million rand that they claim was unlawfully filtered to all these individuals, not only the Mkhize family, keep in mind, but also Tahira Martha, Nadira Mita, those Mkhize associates who kind of fronted the Digital Vibes entity and pocketed most of the money. So that's a civil aspect of it, but I think what we all, as South Africans who are pretty fed up with seeing inertia on corruption cases, we now have to follow not only what the SIU is doing, but more importantly, the Hawks and the NPA. They have to step in because the SIU has already very clear-cut in their cases stated that there are criminal elements to this case because of the money laundering and corruption allegations. And that then very firmly places the ball in the hands of the National Prosecuting Authority and the Hawks, who have to explain to South Africans, if they don't do this, why they aren't instituting a criminal case and criminal proceedings against the likes of Mkhize and his family members and associates who, by all appearances, looted 150 million rand through a COVID-19 contract.
They'll say to you, allegedly, because through it all, former Minister Mkhize, his wife, and their children still maintain that they've done nothing wrong, along with their associates, right?
Yeah, look, so that's been their excuse in terms of the Ethics Committee, and the Ethics Committee in Parliament seems to have taken on board that excuse wholesale, but the SIU has now already poured cold water on that argument. So they, in their court records and their court filings, on a very clear-cut manner, show the flow of funds emanating from the Digital Vibes contract to these family members. They are highly skeptical of the Mkhize's excuse that there was these arm's-length legitimate business dealings involving cattle transaction and all manner of excuses that just happen to coincide with the flow of funds of the Digital Vibes money. We would now like to see, South Africans who follow these corrupt proceedings, we would like to see a court of law determine whether, when somebody like Minister Mkhize or his wife says that there was these arm's-length normal business dealings, a court of law has to go and decide whether that is the case or whether, there's no other reasonable conclusion but to conclude that this was a corrupt contract and this was the proceeds of a corrupt contract illicitly benefiting a minister and his family members.
Pieter-Louis Myburgh, investigative journalist and author, thank you for your time.